The Radical. Fundamental Principles of Freedom, Rational Self-Interest, and Individual Rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Yaron Brook Show. It's December, 15th of December. It's almost the end of 2020. You guys looking forward to that? I certainly am. I'm ready to get over this year, get it done with, put it behind me, and move on with life into with years that hopefully are less dramatic and less intense and less disturbing. So we'll see if my wishes come true. Thanks for joining me tonight. Appreciate it. Third show in a row, third day in a row. We won't be doing a show tomorrow, but we will have one on Wednesday and then over the weekend. But couldn't do a show tomorrow, so I decided to do one today. All right, let's have a look. I thought I'd do a quick news roundup, a bunch of different news items in the news today. So we'll kind of cover stuff. We'll cover stuff in the news. Of course, you're welcome to ask questions, super chat questions. So we're going to talk about the Electoral College. We are going to talk about the stimulus package that it looks like is going to pass. Bipartisan stimulus package. There's a term that scares the bejesus out of me. Bipartisan. We'll talk about debt. Pretty relevant topic given the bipartisan stuff. Bipartisan stimulus stuff. And given that I didn't talk about it yesterday when I promised some of you I would. We'll talk about Russia. Russia's been hacking. Treasury Department and Homeland Security and a bunch of other places. Russian hackers have broken into American computers. And finally, that's what I got on the program. All right, that's enough. But before we get to that, I wanted to mention a novelist who passed away, I think yesterday. I think I saw this yesterday. A novelist whose work I enjoyed, whose works have become movies, and many of the movies, or TV series in some cases. Many of the TV series and movies are very good, and I recommend them. So I thought I'd talk quickly about John le Carré. I think I'm pronouncing it right, John le Carré, who is a spy novelist and wrote famous novels like The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, which is his first very successful book. It was about the Cold War. And Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is a part of a trilogy that was very, very successful and did very, very well. And I think all of the trilogy was turned into TV shows. The second part of it was Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and then there was Smiley's People, and there was a third one. I can't remember the name of the third one of the trilogy. But an author whose heroes were anti-heroes, who do not project man as he could or ought to be. So not a romantic author. Definitely naturalist. Definitely dark. Definitely moral grayness dominates his novels. But a novelist that I found, and I'm not an expert in this, but I found wrote beautifully, had intriguing and interesting plots, and celebrated in a genre of spies that generally celebrates action and physicality, celebrated the mind. George Smiley, the character that is in a number of his books, starting with The Man Who Came In From the Cold. Well, he actually appears in one novel before that, but has become a dominant character, starting with The Man Who Came In From the Cold. Dominates many of the novels. Is a kind of not very physical, certainly not fit person, but incredibly smart, and incredibly dedicated to his craft. And in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is in charge of finding a mole in MI5, I think it is, in MI6. John le Carré himself served in MI5 and MI6, never in a senior position. And then when he, after The Man Who Came In From the Cold, he basically made enough money on the novels that he didn't have to work anymore. Didn't have to work in intelligence services anymore. But he had a certain insight into the way they function. Many of the books deal with the Cold War, but some of his books deal with post-Cold War. And again, interesting, intriguing, great plots. If you like plots, if you like thoughtful, really good stuff. If you like the TV series that I've recommended many times, the French TV series called The Bureau, often reminds me of a John le Carré story. Some TV shows that I thought were very good, made on based on his stories. The Night Manager. Definitely recommend The Night Manager. It's recent. It was made in the last 5 years, I think, and is one of the more heroic of his characters. So there's definitely a hero there, and he's definitely a good guy, and there's no moral ambiguity, and it's not gray. The bad guy's a bad guy, and I really liked it. So The Night Manager, most of it is set in Cairo. With Hugh Laurie, if you like Hugh Laurie, the guy who Hugh Laurie plays the bad guy. Little Drummer Girl. There's a movie. I didn't particularly like the movie. There's a TV series also made recently, Little Drummer Girl. I don't like the politics of a Little Drummer Girl. Again, a lot of the politics are morally ambiguous and having an moral equivalence between the West and the East, and communism, capitalism, Israelis and Palestinians. But A Little Drummer Girl is very well made and intriguing and exciting, right? Even though The Russia House with Sean Connery is quite good. And again, highly recommended. Alec Guinness portrayed George Smiley in 2 6-part miniseries made in the 1970s, 79 and 82, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Smiley's People. And Alec Guinness, for those of you who don't know, is one of the great actors, one of the great British actors. So highly recommend watching those. There was a movie made with Gary Oldman of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, but it's one of those novels that you can't really do it justice in a movie. And what happened in the movie, even though Gary Oldman is really is really good, is you can't understand the plot. The plot is too complex. You can't understand what exactly is going on and why it happens. So I recommend Alec Guinness' six-part miniseries. I think you can find it on one of the streaming services that's out there. There's The Tailor for Panama that's very good. Frank is putting up a bunch of the novels. I haven't read them all, but I definitely read the trilogy on George Smiley. I like George Smiley. Bridge on the River Kwai is not le Carré, so I'm not sure how we got to Bridge on the River Kwai. But, le Carré himself, was an interesting character and grew up poor. His father was a criminal, a con man. His father spent a lot of time in jail, and yet both he and his mother abandoned him and his brother at age 6, and yet both he and his brother had very successful careers. More examples of the environment doesn't shape you. John le Carré became a very successful author. His brother became a businessman, and they did very, very well. So in spite of very rough background, he was in the British military, he's in the British MI5 and MI6, and I'd recommend his books. I mean, An Honorable Schoolboy, that's the third one in the trilogy. So Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy he wrote in 74, Honorable Schoolboy he wrote in 77, and Smiley's People he wrote in 79. And I think I read all of those either in the late 70s or early 80s. But I would definitely recommend them. I would definitely recommend them in spite of again the moral ambiguity and the fact that I don't agree with his politics. The smart spy novels. Kyle says that I read John Cochran's Dead article. No, I don't read the National Review, so I read John Cochran's Dead article on John Cochran's blog, and I'm going to talk about it. You got me, Kyle. I'm just basically saving all of you the time of reading John Cochran by telling you what he writes. But his stuff is so good that why not use it, right? Hopefully, John views it as a compliment and not as something negative. All right, let me also remind you, Super Chat is available. And if you want your questions answered quickly and for sure, then $20 or up, get priority. I will try to answer all the questions, of course, during the show at some point. Of course, don't forget to like the show before you leave. Don't forget to share the show with your friends. Don't forget to support the Yaron Brook Show at yaronbrookshow.com/support and on a variety of other platforms like Patreon, Subscribestar, and Locals. And yeah, hopefully we'll get some of our heavy hitters on the Super Chat today. It's been a while since I've seen a nice, round, significant figure appear there. Maybe all the matching got everybody, got all those, caught all those, or maybe people are saving up for New Year's Eve when we've got a $5,000 match. That's going to be a challenge, guys. So maybe you should be saving up for New Year's Eve, right? On the 31st, we'll do a show. I'm not sure exactly from where, because I have a feeling I'm not going to have a house on the 31st. I'm not going to have furniture on the 31st. I have no idea how I'm going to do that show. Maybe off my laptop or something. We'll figure it out when the time comes. But there's a good chance that my house will be sold, my furniture will be gone, and everything will be done. So we will see. All right. Electoral College. Well, I mean, this is a quick one. Electoral College today, by, the Constitution requires the Electoral College to basically, in a sense, vote for President of the United States. The Electoral College voted today. The vote is in, and the vote is as expected and as we knew the day after the election, pretty much, or a couple of days after the election, is that Biden got a significant majority of the Electoral College and Trump lost. It'll be interesting to see what the strategy is now. The Electoral College vote gets certified, in a sense, gets formally adopted and accepted by the House of Representatives on January 5th. So that's why, January 6th. So that's why somebody yesterday was saying, oh, Trump's going to win on January 6th because the House is going to vote for Trump. No, I mean, today it's official. I think this is pretty much it. I think it's over. In addition, the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled today on one more of the many so-called cases about systemic election fraud or irregularities or unconstitutional laws or practices. Basically threw it out and with a pretty scathing rebuttal to the Trump lawyers. So it looks like it's over. It looks like it's over. I thought it was over, pretty much day after the election, but many people have held on for hope that Trump would win. It's gone. So whether you supported Trump and you're disappointed, or whether you didn't support Trump and are pleased, I don't think anybody's excited by Trump losing or Biden winning. But I think many people are not unhappy by it, by seeing Trump lose. Now we'll see what happens to the Republican Party. The real question now is how we move forward. I just wanted to say something about the Electoral College. I mean, the Electoral College is in our Constitution. It's the way we do elections. It gives really power to the states over the popular vote. Founding Fathers were very much dedicated to a federal system, very much dedicated to rejection of majority rule democracy, where the majority can vote on everything and the majority dictates everything. They believed in a constitutional-based republic, a constitution that limited the role of government, and states that had certain autonomy, and we can talk a little bit about that autonomy in a minute, but certain autonomy about running the state and about the laws within the state up to a point, including autonomy around election. One of the frustrating things about the Texas lawsuits, other lawsuits, is that the whole point of, if you're an originalist, if you believe in the Constitution, the whole point of the founders was there's certain issues that have to be left to the states. And the idea that one state would sue another state because this state didn't like the way another state did something would then require a federal court, the Supreme Court, to dictate to all states how to do something uniformly. Right? So it's the fact that conservatives then are suing states in order to get them to behave in a particular way. I mean, it's just the same old story of conservatives not having an ideology, not sticking to any ideology, but doing what they think will be necessary to win. In other words, adopting a completely pragmatic view of the world and abandoning any semblance of reverence to the Founding Fathers and reverence to the Constitution, and abandoning it. The whole point of our system is to allow states these kind of this ability to be autonomous. The Electoral College also assures us that candidates, when they run for office on a national ticket for president, have to pay attention to many states. They don't just focus on a few cities because that's where the election is going to be decided, as it would be if it was a popular vote. I mean, if it was a popular vote, you would spend almost all your time in New York and California. Those would be the two states that you would spend all of your time, because those are the two states that would decide your fate. As it is today, that is not the case. You actually spend time in a lot of different states. And as more states become competitive, people will have to spend time in more of those states. You don't become beholden to the heavily populated cities at the expense of everybody else. And if it's a popular vote, then the voting has to be standardized. Then the voting procedure has to be standardized. The standards, everything has to be standardized across all states. If it's an electoral college, each state gets to authorize its own methodology for running an election. And as long as it doesn't violate any principle of the Constitution, then it is fine. So I think, as you know, I think the founders were geniuses. I think they invented the system for a reason. I think those reasons hold up. I think generally we want to have a small, limited federal government. We want small, limited state governments too, but we want a small, limited federal government. We do not want a federal government that now intervenes in the states, regulating even elections. That would only legitimize and justify the federal government from taking over more and more and more things that should be relegated to the state. So I like the Electoral College. There's going to be a push to get rid of it by Democrats. It requires a constitutional amendment. It's unlikely to happen, but there could be, you could see in the years to come, a push to do that. They think they've got it nailed if they get a popular vote, because they've won the last few elections through the popular vote. But I'm not sure that they'd actually benefit from it long term. But anyway. Let's see. All right. So that's the Electoral College. Not a lot to say there. The stimulus package. There seems to be a compromise bill that Republicans and Democrats are both going to support. That always scares me. That always scares me, because when Democrats and Republicans are going to support something together, that is almost always a sign that they are going to violate our rights, that they are going to infringe on us, that whatever element within the Republican Party or the Democratic Party that might believe in rights to some extent, to some degree, has folded, has given up, because how are they getting a majority? And so the stimulus bill is about to pass. It is a large stimulus bill. It's $1.4 trillion. We've already done about 4. So this is another 1.4. That'll bring us up to $5.4 trillion. It will have everything in it. It will have help for states and localities, something that Republicans have sworn not to vote for, and yet it looks like they will vote for it. It'll have checks to individuals. We might as well bail out everybody. It'll have checks to small businesses through, I think, the PPP program, an extension of the PPP program. It'll have goodies and wonderful things and wonderful little checks to almost everybody. It's not a stimulus package. It's a bailout package. It's a package to bail out small businesses. It's a package to bail out banks. It's a package to bail out certain individuals, though most Americans are still getting, who are unemployed, are still getting unemployment benefits, so why they need another $1,200 check is not clear. It's also a package that is going to attempt, we'll see what happens, the moratorium on paying rent expires December 31st. We'll see if Trump extends it. He's the one who put it in place. He could extend it. But the check is viewed as a way of giving people money to pay their rent. So it's a bailout. Stimulus creates economic activity. I don't believe the government can stimulate. The best thing the government could do to stimulate the economy is to stop spending money. It's deregulate. It's get out of our lives. Another $1.4 trillion taken from us so it can be redistributed is not stimulus. It's anti-stimulus. It's a bailout. And okay, we believe in bailing out. Not just we're bailing out states. We're bailing out cities. We're bailing out businesses. We're bailing out individuals. We're bailing everybody out. Don't call it a stimulus. Call it a bailout package. Because this will not stimulate economic activity, because it is not true that consumption stimulates economic activity. Production stimulates economic activity. Investment stimulates economic activity. And the best way to get production and investment is to get off producers' and investors' backs. To shrug. So that they can actually go out and create the jobs, build the factories, produce the stuff. Produce, create, build, make, employ. That's what entrepreneurs and business people do. And they do that when they're free. They do that when they're free. And they're free when the government stops regulating. They're also free when the government stops sucking capital out of the economy through borrowing and redistributing. And of course, they're also freer when the government is not bailing out some businesses, when there are people with ideas who could compete, but who can't compete against the businesses being bailed out constantly. Now, the system of bailouts and subsidies and distortions and perversions in our economy is so complex. It's so sophisticated that it's hard to critique any one element, because it's everywhere and it's everything. And it's really sad. But that's the world in which we live. And what it'll cause, I've said many times in my view, is significant stagnation as money gets sucked out of the private economy and therefore doesn't get invested. And as all this money printing in a sense, ultimately lands up in creating inflation. Let me see, there was a question here. Some states are, a question about the Electoral College, I'll take it. Some states are passing laws that will give their electoral points to the national popular vote, even if it conflicts. Should this be allowed? Doesn't it subvert the whole system? No, I don't think it should be allowed, but I don't think it should be allowed. And they will only do it when I think 2/3 of the state adopt these laws. Now, if 2/3 of the state adopt the laws, you're basically changing the Constitution. So the laws, I think Colorado had this on the ballot this time. I don't know if it passed or it didn't. But the law says that if 2/3 of the states have this law, then they will allocate their votes based on the win of the popular vote. Whether that's constitutional, whether the Supreme Court would uphold that or reject that, and whether it would ever come to pass, because whether you'll ever get 2/3 of the states to actually do that, I doubt it. I doubt it. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Some people, I'll just comment on something that's going on the chat. Some people conflate the idea in this world. There's certain people who can only think in two dimensions. You can only be a leftist or a rightist. So if you're against the right, you're by definition a left. And if you're against the left, you're by definition right. And people like that can't actually place objectivism. Because objectivism in the political map today is neither left nor right. As I've often said, the real political line is between collectivism and individualism. It has nothing to do with left or right. Left and right today are both collectivist. You can be, shockingly, I know this is a shock to some people, you can be both anti-left and anti-right at the same time. By being pro-individualism, by being pro-capitalism, by being pro-freedom, you would actually, by definition, be anti-left and anti-right at the same time. So you cannot be an objectivist and a leftist. But they conflate objectivism with left because objectivists don't go get all excited by supporting the right. So since they can only think in dualities, you're either left or right, and you're not pro-right, so you must be pro-left. And, get over it, guys. Get over it. And start thinking, using your mind. It's there for a purpose. And get away from the tribalism and the kind of dual thinking, this duality, that Ayn Rand talks a lot about. Objectivism is not intrinsic, it's subjective. We're not, we're objective. A two-party system doesn't define who you are and what you are. There's a two-party systems, both are collectivist. Doesn't mean you're for this or for that. I'm against both. The fact that there's a two-party system doesn't change the fact that I reject both, as Ayn Rand did. Ayn Rand was often critical of the right and of the left, and often didn't vote in elections. And sometimes, I think when she was younger, voted for the left because the right was so abhorrent to her. So you've got to make decisions about individual rights, about freedom, about liberty, not about left or right, about liberty, not about Republicans versus Democrats. Now, we can disagree about which path goes towards liberty. But the fact that we disagree about which path goes to liberty and you don't agree with me does not make me or anybody else on this chat a leftist, doesn't make us, if you're arguing from a different perspective, a rightist, objectivist. Politics is not the politics of the right. Objectivist politics is the politics of individualism. And if the right is not individualistic, as it's not today, then Daniel asked, you're making the absurd proposition that the left and right are both statists. Yeah, they are. Might one even call them mystics of various kinds? Yeah, both of them. Having non-fundamental disagreements with one another? Yeah, absolutely. And they're both altruistic in the sense that they both believe in the sacrifice of the individual to some collective goal. They just have different collective goals. They're both mystics. One worships Mother Earth and one worships Father in the skies, right? And they're both wrong on issue after issue after issue. Both. Two people, both disagreeing with one another and being wrong. This is the thing about the world. There are multiple ways in which you can be wrong. Multiple ways. An infinite number of ways. There's only one way of being right. But there are lots of ways of being wrong. And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing left and right being wrong. And objectivism, I think, is right and has a right view of politics. And neither one of those views is any of the objectivist views are represented by left or right. So how can I be pro-right when my views are not being represented in the right? How can I be pro-left when my views are not represented in the left? I'm neither right nor left. And I know, these are hard concepts because we're so trained to think in dualities, and we're so trained to think in tribes and in collectives and in groups and in belonging. And we don't belong anywhere. And I know that's hard. It's lonely. And this issue of the stimulus, by the way, is a good example. I mean, Republicans and Democrats are going to vote for this. The right and the left are going to vote for it. It's crazy to spend $1.4 trillion on top of $4 trillion you've already spent. And we've spent $4 trillion, by the way, because both left and right wanted to. The right didn't stand up for capitalism. Trump didn't veto stimulus bailout bills. And we've been running trillion-dollar deficits during Trump administration. Is that a right I can support? Support. No. I can't support the left either because they want to run $2 trillion deficits. So I've got two evils, and it's such a level of evil that I'm not sure there's a lesser of two evils. All right. Which brings us to the debt. And as usual, the grumpy economist, I don't know why he calls himself the grumpy economist. He's not grumpy. He seems like a nice guy to me. But the grumpy economist, John Cochrane, has an excellent article called Debt Denial, our national debt denial. It's on his blog. I recommend his blog. I've recommended his blog many times. Grumpy, just search on Google Grumpy Economist or John Cochrane, and you'll find it. And it's excellent. And he talks about the fact that on the left in particular, but I think the right has joined this. I mean, Rush Limbaugh, about a year ago, made this amazing statement. It just blew my mind. He said something like, yeah, we've always known deficits don't matter. But when the left caused the deficits, like under Obama, we made a big deal out of it. But now that it's our deficits, i.e. a Republican administration, we can admit to the fact that deficits are fine. They have no negative economic consequences. That's just not true. They do have negative economic consequences, significant negative economic consequences, and we're living through them. Low economic growth, government grown too big because the deficit really reflects the fact that there is lots of government spending, which means lots of government intervention in the economy and in our lives more broadly. Government spending is bad. Government spending more and more and more is even worse because it represents the level, the extent of government intervention in our lives, the extent to which government is violating, restricting our rights rather than protecting them. All right. The challenge is that we are already running massive deficits. This year will probably be a $4 trillion deficit. Before this, $1.4 trillion. In previous years, we've run $1 trillion deficits. During the last few years of the Obama administration, deficits were actually coming down as a percent of GDP, partially because Republican House and Senate did not let Democrats and Obama spend out of control. But that was reversed under Trump. Spending has gone through the roof under Trump, and we've seen deficits expanding. Deficits add up to debt. And the debt today stands at around 100% of our GDP, our gross domestic product. It's at the highest level we've ever seen since World War II in terms of a percentage of GDP. And Biden and the left would like to send it skyrocketing. Skyrocketing. They have ambitions of spending another $10 trillion on anywhere from Medicare for all to Green New Deal to infrastructure to just spend. They probably want to bail out all the pension plans around the country. I mean, there's no end to the amount of money the Democrats want to spend. And there is a whole economic theory, both from the modern monetary theory people and from the old Keynesians, like Paul Krugman, neo-Keynesians, that it's not a problem to spend the money. And here's the logic, and see, hopefully you guys can follow this. It's pretty straightforward, I think. So we're living in times of unbelievably low interest rates, historically low interest rates. And Democrats are saying, if we can borrow at these low interest rates, and the economy still grows, then the economy can actually grow faster than the interest rates. And if we increase our debt and then keep it flat every year, because the economy is growing faster than the interest rates, every year the deficit will shrink as a percent of GDP. So the idea is right now, you can borrow at 1%, right? And then, so the debt, and then you pay for the borrowing, you pay through borrowing, right? So the debt, you're paying 1%. The debt is then growing by 1% a year. But if the economy goes at 2% a year, then the ratio of debt to GDP slowly falls, about 1% each year. And in a few decades, you're back to where you were, right? So the assumption is you're taking a huge amount of debt now, and then what? This is what Biden wants to do. Take on a huge amount of debt now because interest rates are low. And then what do? Well, the theoreticians among this group would say, well, then you stop borrowing. But what's the likelihood of that actually happening? What's the likelihood that politicians, after borrowing, let's say, $1 trillion to fund all their goody projects, and when it's done, they just stop? When has that ever happened? Why would one assume it would? And not only stop, we go backwards and actually have a balanced budget. I mean, what's the likelihood of a balanced budget when we're running under a Republican president, $1 trillion deficits? What's the chance we can balance that? It's almost zero. Nobody's going to balance these budgets in order to make the debt to GDP ratio start coming down. It also assumes that interest rates are always going to be low. So whenever we're funding, we have to borrow money in order to pay the interest on the debt. We keep borrowing it at 1%. But as you borrow more and more and more, economic theory at least tells you that the interest rate should rise, not decline. So are we sure interest rates are going to stay this low, even if we ramp up borrowing to, let's say, 150% of GDP. So imagine if, we said, no, instead of the one-time big binge of borrowing, we're going to just run small deficits and grow those deficits every year, or grow the debt every year by the deficit. So not too big. So the percent of GDP, again, the deficit would shrink. But that would mean a 1% deficit today of GDP would be $200 billion. But that's tiny as compared to the deficits we're actually running. Are they really going to cut spending to shrink the deficit to that level? So there's no end to the borrowing that the government has. It's going to continue to do it. We're going to borrow more and more and more year after year. And what happens in the next financial crisis? What happens in the next pandemic? What happens if we go to war? China, Russia, who knows? We borrow more then again. At some point, this is not sustainable. I don't know what the point is. I would have thought the point would have come already. But at some point, this becomes unsustainable. It just can't continue. Right? I mean, if you have another financial crisis, we know governments bail everybody out in the financial crisis. The government's going to have to borrow $5 to $10 trillion to take care of that. Are people going to buy the government's debt? Are there people out there that will trust at that point, as the U.S. gets to 150, 200% of GDP debt? Are they going to trust that they'll ever see their money back, that the U.S. will be able to pay it back? And what's going to happen to the U.S. economy as this many dollars get sucked in to government programs, to government distribution, to government control, to government having the purse strings? Can the economy grow at 2% steadily with the government playing such a big role? Does anybody really have an answer to that? And as these deficits increase, and then, of course, in 10 years, about 10 years, what happens to Social Security and Medicaid? They start running deficits. And you're adding trillions, onto trillions, onto trillions. And if you actually run a little financial model, and you run these numbers, and you make some simple projections about the future, I mean, it's insane. The United States looks like, Greece very quickly. And yeah, the difference between Greece and the United States is that the United States can print money. Yeah, so we can print money and pay off all our debts. But we know what the price is to printing money. It's inflation. And we know how devastating inflation can be. Inflation can destroy a country's economy very, very quickly. And what's the alternative to inflation? The alternative to inflation is default. It's what Greece did. It's going bankrupt. It's having to lay massive numbers of, and of course Greece was bailed out by the Germans. Who's going to bail out the U.S.? Nobody can bail out the U.S. Let me just see. So you can see how this easily spirals out of control. And it could spiral out of control at any point. We don't know when it's going to happen. There's no magic number that we get to this level of debt, it spirals out of control. Now, if interest rates go up because the government is sucking up so much debt, then the interest payments that the government has to make on the debt go up. And that expands the deficits. It's all self-reinforcing towards a catastrophe, towards some kind of Armageddon. Either inflation or default. Now, inflation is a type of default, but a different mechanism of default. And when it happens, these things happen quickly and dramatically, and you don't have warning. As much as I love markets, And as much as I think markets reflect the best available information, the fact is the markets are terrible at predicting crises. Interest rates do not signal a Greek crisis. They didn't. Before the Greek crisis, interest rates were very low until suddenly they weren't. Interest rates didn't indicate there was going to be inflation in the 1970s or disinflation in the 1980s. They caught up once it happened, but they didn't predict it. Economic prediction is very difficult, and markets do not do a great job at predicting catastrophes, crises, big, momentous events. They never have been, and they're not good at it. So, a lot of us feel a little stupid that we constantly warn you. If they keep doing this, it's going to cause inflation, and it doesn't. So you guys go, well, you see, you were wrong. And we go, oh, but it's going to cause inflation, or it's going to cause default. You're going to pay the piper someday, one way or the other. And people keep telling me, yep, hasn't happened yet. And yeah, it didn't happen in Greece until it happened to Greece. It didn't happen to the United States until it happened in the United States in the 1970s. We didn't have a financial crisis. Almost nobody, other than a few hedge fund guys, predicted the financial crisis. And you didn't have the financial crisis until nobody predicted it, until you had the financial crisis. So, I know it's easy to say people like Peter Schiff, they're always doomsayers. Yeah, but that's because there's a truth to their doomsaying. And it's because someday they'll be right. The difference between me and Peter is Peter's always confident it's going to be now. It's going to be soon. It's going to be any minute now. And I don't know, and I admit I don't know. And I usually think it's probably going to be longer than Peter Schiff thinks. But at some point, Peter's going to be right. And it's going to happen on his time frame because it keeps shifting. Because at some point, it will happen. At some point, we'll get massive inflation or we'll get default. Now, I've always thought that our government would choose inflation over default as its preference, right? But John Cochran makes some good points about it. If you default on your debt, I mean, everybody suffers, but who suffers immediately? Who suffers the most painful suffering? Who is it self-evident? You can see them suffering, not self-evident, but right in front of you, you can see their suffering. Who is that? Well, it's Wall Street. Big financial institutions. It's foreigners. It's the Chinese. It's the Japanese. It's the Europeans. They own our debt. So if we defaulted on our debt, then the people who directly would suffer, defaulting means you don't pay the debt back. Or more likely, you restructure the debt so you get 50 cents on a dollar. The people who directly lose from that are the people we love to hate, are the people our culture loves to hate on right and left, foreigners and Wall Street. Who suffers if you allow inflation? Who suffers if you allow inflation? If you allow inflation, everybody suffers. Common man suffers. The voters suffer. And the voters won't tolerate it. They'll vote you out of office. They hate inflation. So, inflation is much more damaging to the political class than is default. Default, they can excuse it by screwing people nobody likes anyway. Inflation, the poor suffer from inflation. So that's the first time I thought of it that way from a political perspective, political incentive perspective. And I think John is absolutely right. There's a good chance that the U.S. government gets into a position where it has to default. explicitly, which is interesting. Some people say, but wait a minute, the dollar is a reserve currency all over the world. Foreigners love holding dollars. Yeah, but they'll only hold dollars in certain finite quantities. And only for as long as they think the U.S. can actually pay it back, where the debt is safe. Trust can vanish quickly. Very, very difficult, just generally in life. Very, very difficult to establish trust. Very easy to lose it. Trust can vanish very quickly. And when it does, all the dollars flow to the U.S. Again, you get pressure on inflation. Now, people say, and I think I talked about this on a past show, people say, but look, when we came out of World War II, we had a 100% debt to GDP ratio and we paid it all back. Yes. Very different world. At the end of World War II, we cut spending because we stopped the war. And the government ran for a long time. Small surpluses. And the economy grew at 4%. So as a percent of GDP, debt shrank very quickly. We were actually paying it back through those small surpluses. Also in 1945, we took all that industrial capacity that had built tanks and weapon systems, and we reoriented it to building things that people actually wanted and needed. So you took idle capacity. Capacity was not productive. Build tanks is not directly productive. And made it productive. And that was a huge boon to the economy, which allowed for massive economic growth. Plus, arguably, the U.S. was less regulated, less controlled. The government spent less money. There was no redistribution of wealth. There was no Medicare. There was no Medicare, Medicaid that are bankrupting us now. If you look at the percentage of government spending today that is entitlement, that didn't exist back then. You had Social Security, but you didn't have Medicare, Medicaid, which dominate government spending today. And nobody is willing to touch. Nobody's willing to touch. So social programs were small and they were solvent. Today they're huge and they are bankrupt. So there's no way that we can use World War II as an example when we are today engaged in a spending binge where productive capacity is utilized, where we don't have en masse millions of people coming home from the front who are going to be suddenly employed in productive activities. And of course, we don't have a government today dedicated even a little bit. We don't have an opposition dedicated even a little bit to cutting spending, reforming entitlement, shrinking the state. Nobody. This is again goes back to left and right. When both left and right want to expand the state, how can we support that? We must reject them both, even if we think one is more evil than the other. We can't associate with either one of them. You can still vote Republican, but you can't be pro-Republican in the sense of, I agree with them. You don't if you're a capitalist, if you're pro-individual rights, if you're pro-freedom. I mean, we're in trouble. We're in deep, deep, deep economic trouble, and it's only going to get worse unless the Republicans, now this is my hope, right? And this is, if you live in Georgia, this is my call for you to call to arms. Republicans have got to win at least one Senate seat in Georgia. I hope they win both, but they've got to win at least one. Because the only way to slow down government spending, is for Republicans to be an opposition party, for Republicans to stop the Democrats' spending binges, which, by the way, they're not doing right now. So I don't have a lot of hope for Republicans, even if they win the Senate. But it's the only hope. Because if Democrats win the Senate, who's going to control spending? Who's going to say, wait a minute? So we are really, it really is, the Georgia vote is really crucial. It really is. Let's see. Yeah, so, we'll see what's going to happen, even in the next year or two. So during this crisis, COVID, the Fed has basically printed money like crazy. That money is today sitting in your bank account, in all of our bank accounts, and basically reserves at the Federal Reserve. So that money is not being spent. That money, we've seen a massive increase in checking account deposits. And all that money is in people's checking accounts. It's in the bank. It's not being deployed through loans. It's not being deployed by the bank to investment. It's just sitting there. What happens when things recover? People get more confident. And they start taking their money out of the bank and spending it. You might even see a boom in economic growth in the first, second or third quarter after the vaccines in the United States. But what happens when that happens? Well, what happens is you get inflation. And what happens when you get inflation is you get interest rates go up. So we will see. It might happen sooner rather than later. We might start seeing the signs sooner rather than later as the economy recovers from this and people start spending all their money that the Fed printed, driving interest rates up by causing fears of inflation. The main thing that can be done about this, the main thing that should be done about this is cut spending. Cut spending. And again, this is why I'm for voting Republican so vehemently for voting Republican in Georgia, so that they have the ability to, in a sense, veto the crazy level of spending that many of the Democrats want to engage in. I like divided government, and I think you should too. Instead of committing yourself to one political party, you should like divided government. You should look at history, evaluate the results of different combinations of Republicans and Democrats, and you make the call on what is best. So far, from all the data I've seen, from an economic perspective, the best combination is a Democratic president, Republican House and Senate, or Senate. All right, that is Debt Matters, and you should read John Cochrane. Let me remind everybody before we go say a few words about Russia. I want to remind everybody that to like the show before they leave. We should be over 100 likes right now. To share the show once it's done. To share the short videos that Action Jackson makes of these programs. Those are bite-sized. They're easier for people to consume. And I remind you, of course, to support the show. You can come on the Super Chat and value for value. Show me that you value my work by making a contribution or by asking a question on the Super Chat. You can also do so, and it's, in a sense, more valuable to me if you do so on Patreon, Subscribestar, or YaronBrookShow.com/support, or Locals. You can do it any of those places. All right. Russia. So today it was revealed that the government suspects that Russia has hacked into the Homeland Security, into Treasury, and into a number of other government agencies. Hard to tell what they got, what they took. But this is a long pattern of Russia intervening, Russia hacking, stealing, I mean, there's no question in my mind the Russians intervened in the 2016 election. They tried to intervene in 2020. I think we were better prepared. There's no question Russia undermines the United States everywhere and anywhere that it can. Russia is no friend of the United States. Putin's whole philosophy of governance is the opposite of the philosophy of governance on which this country is built. Russia is a bad player in the world. It is the aggressor in Ukraine, and it has ambitions. Putin has ambitions, although I don't think they'll be fulfilled, to retake, if you will, the Soviet Union, to remake the Soviet Union. He calls the Soviet Union, dismantling of the Soviet Union, the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. We're talking about the 20th century, where you had a Holocaust of World War II, World War I. You had a lot of tragedies, but the greatest, according to Putin, is not the creation of the Soviet Union and thus the enslavement of hundreds of millions of people, but the breaking up of the Soviet Union. Russia has always wanted to dominate. It is no friend. It is an enemy. Luckily, maybe not luckily, maybe because they're so autocratic, authoritarian, Russia's pretty weak. Russia's sits in their labs by their computers in Russia and hack, but they can't deploy a serious army in the field. They can't present a significant threat to the United States in any real dimension other than they have good programmers. But one should not diminish the threat that Russia represents. Yes, Putin is an ex-KGB thug, and one committed to Russian supremacy. Luckily, I mean, again, a consequence, I think, of Putin's rule, a consequence of bad rule from a lot of different Russian leaders. Russia's economy is not a healthy economy. It's not a good economy. It's not a growing economy. It's not a prosperous economy. So he doesn't have the resources to engage in more disruptive activities. And one of the many things I disliked about Trump was his attitude towards Putin, his friendly, almost groveling attitude towards Russia. And yeah, Russia has nukes, but it's not suicidal, so it's unlikely Russia would ever use the nukes if it feared that nukes would be used against it. And I'm also, I have to admit, somewhat dubious about how well they would work. Would they hit their targets? Would they reach their targets? Would they blow up when it happened? Michael asked if for $500 I'd review the show The Man in the High Castle. Yes, I would, but I've only watched the first season, so my review would be based on the first season. I've not watched the other two seasons. So if you want a full review of all three seasons, one that'll take time because I have to watch them, and it'll probably take more than $500. But for $500, I'd certainly review the first season. We need allies? We don't need allies. And our allies, in this case, our allies are NATO. NATO's a far better ally than Russia. Russia's clearly anti the U.S. It's committed to an anti-U.S. agenda. And Hillary is no closer to Putin than Trump is. Trump, indeed, is much closer to Putin and much more immersed with Putin. So I don't get any of these explanations. I mean, I have a theory about why Trump and Putin are so close, and it has both to do with Trump's general adoration of authoritarians, but it also, we won't know until we see more about Trump's finances, but I wouldn't be surprised if some Russian oligarchs have over the years invested in Trump projects. And I've thought that since before the 2016 elections. Because Wall Street wouldn't deal with Trump. No American bank would deal with him. That's why he had to deal with Deutsche Bank. And where does Deutsche Bank get the money? So I'm not scared of Russia. But I'm also realistic about Russia. Right? Russia is an aggressor and actively pursuing an agenda that's anti-American. They pursue it in the Middle East. They do whatever they can to go against the United States in the Middle East, and they pursue it globally, including, things like hacking into our servers and things like that, and disrupting anything American that they can in any kind of way that they can. Russia is no friend of the United States and should never be treated. Well, let's say, unless they change, never say never. It should not today be treated as a friend of the United States. And I thought the Trump administration was way too cozy with the Russians. All right, let's see. We are going to do the super chat. Let's do some super chat questions. We'll start with the $20 ones, and then we'll go backwards to the lower dollar amount ones. Henry Ford was a wife-beating drunk and an anti-Semite. I didn't know he was a wife-beating drunk. I knew he was an anti-Semite, but I didn't know he was a wife-beating drunk. Yet a rationally selfish, productive genius at the same time. Doesn't this demonstrate human psychology and morality on binary? Yeah, I mean, I definitely think human psychology and morality on binary. People can compartmentalize. They can be productive geniuses in some aspect of their lives and be irrational in the other aspects of their life. You can see that all around us. We can see people who are super rational in one area and superly irrational in another area. Nobel Prize winning scientists who are religious. Businessmen, profit-seeking, productive, brilliant businessmen who are religious, who are socialist, who have wrong views. And I didn't know, and I'm not taking your word for it, but let's assume that Henry Ford was a wife-beating drunk. Yeah, I mean, there probably are some like that. I think it's rare because there's a certain level of irrationality and a certain level of rationality of a productive genius that you can't hold as separate. And of course, even Henry Ford couldn't hold them as separate. And I'm sure he was a deeply unhappy man because he couldn't hold them as separate. But it is truly amazing that you can, that human psychology is such that you can compartmentalize and that you can be brilliant and productive and, in a sense, moral in one area and not in another, which means Now, I still think that in our context, as a historical figure, what we focus on is the way he changed the world. That's what impacts us. That's what needs to be venerated, while acknowledging that he was a bad man in other areas of his life. But that the white beating and the anti-Semitism, one wonders, I don't know enough about Henry Ford, but was he a productive genius for his whole life? Did he slip towards later in life? Because the mind is an integrating machine. And if you've got a compartment with deep irrationality in it, with evasive, anti-like behavior associated with it, that's going to creep into everything else that you do. And it's not sustainable. I'm not going to read this comment on TOS. I just don't want to, I don't want to get involved in it. So I think it was Michael. If I want to do an analysis of my views, then I would do it on. Then what I need to stop answering these questions, and I need to stop, not let you ask them, because if I'm going to do it, I should do it on my terms, not as answers to your questions, and I should just lay it out, and maybe one day I will, but I'm not going to do it now. I'm not going to do it anytime in the future, in the foreseeable future. I have no motivation to do it. Instead of ordering takeout from restaurants forced to close, shouldn't we patron restaurants who have the balls to stay open in defiance of those lockdown orders? Also, how is ethics a science? Yes, we should definitely go and support restaurants that have the balls, as you put it, to open. And I did. I've been to 2 restaurants. And not only did I sit down and eat, but then I ordered takeout so I could, have for the next day. So I supported them doubly, if you will. So Absolutely. I think you should support the restaurants that stay open. You should encourage disobedience to these irrational, rights violating, business destroying laws. And you should, the other thing I do, which I think you should adopt, is I thank them for staying open. At the end of the meal, at the beginning of the meal, in the middle of the meal, I say thank you for staying open. I really appreciate it. And I support your cause. So give them the moral, give them, what do you call it? Support them morally, not just financially. How is ethics a science? What is a science? A science is a systematic, rational approach to the data. I don't have a formal definition of science right in front of me, where one is guided by evidence and one uses reason in order to induce truths. That's what ethics does. Ethics looks at the evidence, the facts of reality that relate to human nature, facts of reality that relate to the requirements for human survival, facts of reality that relate to the requirements of even having values and having a morality. And it is derived, it is induced, if you will, from reality. So it asks questions, observes reality, induces from reality, tests those conclusions, those principles in reality by studying history, by observing human psychology, by observing human behavior, what works, what doesn't work, integrates across. It follows the same track as a science does. It's just not numeric. All right, let's see. Did the Nazis wage a war against the concept of mercy? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't strike me. I don't think of it in those terms. Nazis waged a war against human life. They waged a war against liberty, freedom. They waged a war against reason and rationality. They waged a war against everything. Did they wage a war against the concept of mercy? Why? I mean, they might have been merciful here and there towards some people, but it wasn't about mercy. Mercy wasn't the issue at stake, I don't think, unless I'm missing something. So I may be missing something in the question, but I just don't see it that way. The Nazis waged war against reality. Certainly against man and man's place in reality. Is intelligence the ability to comprehend and rearrange abstractions? Well, no, because, I mean, it's not comprehend and rearrange. It's, I mean, comprehend in the broader sense, yes. It's the ability to abstract, to form abstractions, to understand abstractions, and to integrate. I don't like rearrange, and to integrate abstractions. Integration is a big part of it. And, you know, the forming is, so the two components of forming concepts, forming abstractions, and integrating abstractions. I think that's right. I don't know if I define intelligence that way, but I'm not sure how I define intelligence. I'd have to give that a lot more thought. But yeah, I mean, suddenly, I don't like the comprehend. Comprehend is way too passive, or it's like the concepts are out there and I need to comprehend them. It's creating the abstractions. And then rearranging I don't like. It's not about rearranging. It's about integrating. But I don't think that can be it. I mean, great chess players, you would say, are very intelligent. Their intelligence is manifest in their ability to plan for many outcomes into the future. They can go through the many calculations very, very fast. So intelligence is also about that. I mean, intelligence is a very, I think, complex phenomena. This is why I'm opposed to having one test. You know, one test that was invented a long time ago for a different purpose and now is used as the measure of intelligence, IQ test. as a measure of intelligence, because I think it's far more complex than the way people typically think about it. I'd happy to do. Somebody says Yuan should be doing free restaurant reviews. I'd happy to do free restaurant reviews. I'm not sure you guys are interested, and I'm not sure. We all are global, right? So I don't know if there's enough of a concentration of people that you'd find it interesting for me to review a restaurant in Puerto Rico, or for me to review a restaurant in San Sebastián in Spain, or for me to review a restaurant in Rancho Santa Margarita in California. I'm not sure, restaurant reviews are typically local or international for people who fly around eating at restaurants. So, I'm not sure of the value to you. If there was real interest by you guys in me doing restaurant reviews, I'd do it. I do them. Okay, the number of electors by state is determined by population size. That's right, by census. Not sure how then that properly solves the issue of incentivizing national campaigns. California and New York still hold most electors. Yes. But it's not in proportion to their population. I have to think this through, right? So the rounding, there's a certain rounding that goes on. Certain number of people get. So you're stumping me here. But I think it's the fact that this is why Biden could win the popular vote. And so here, this is why. Jesus. It's kind of obvious, right? This is the point about California. California has a lot of electors, but it's all or nothing, right? So if the Democrats win California, it doesn't matter if they win it by a little bit or if they win it by a lot. California is a Democrat, right? They get all the electoral votes. So let's say you had now, so today, a Republican would be a fool to spend $1 on advertising in California because he doesn't care if he loses California 51-49 or 60-40. If he's sure he's going to lose California, he's not going to spend any money, any effort in California. If you went to a popular vote, then the margin in California, right? The margin in California, the additional people you could get to vote Republican in California is so much more substantial than whether people vote for you or not in Iowa. You would spend all your time in California trying to get every single marginal vote you could because that vote counts towards your total. In today's system, that vote doesn't count towards your total. So you're not going to California. You're going to be in Iowa. You're going to be in every other state. So it's the winner-take-all nature. Now, if California said, we're going to send electors out there based on the vote, then you would spend time because you'd want to maximize the number of electors you were getting. But if you knew you were losing California, you do. So what you do is you spend all your money and all your time in battleground states and in smaller states. Because there you can win all of them. And if you win a large number of the states, even if you win it by a tiny little margin, you get all of their electorals. Hopefully that explained it. That is the real explanation, but hopefully that was understood. Do you think they'll blame capitalism when the government defaults on its debts or massively inflates the currency like they did in the 2008 financial crisis? How would that blaming be framed? I think they'll blame the fact that the rich didn't pay their fair share of taxes. They'll blame the fact that taxes weren't high enough. And that's what caused the deficits. They'll blame low taxes on deficits, which caused the debt, which caused the defaults or the inflation or whatever it happens to be. So yes, they will try to blame the rich, the wealthy, the capitalists, the businessmen. Not that I'm equivocating between all of those. They're not all the same thing. I'll have a harder time blaming the system of capitalism, but I'll definitely blame the capitalists. And I'm sure they'll make up some stuff that I can't even think of. Do you at all enjoy movies which depict religious mythos as reality for entertainment purposes? I was kind of curious why you picked these. The Blues Brothers. So the Blues Brothers, I guess, they got a mission from God. They're on a mission from God. Yeah, how can you? I mean, the Blues Brothers is I think a fabulous movie. It's fun. It's funny. It's entertaining. It's benevolent. It's the music is fantastic. It's got that blues, you want to get up and dance kind of music. It's just a fabulous movie. It's fun. It's got what's his name in it? Whose name I forget because I can't do names. Anyway, this is why I can't do movie reviews, I guess, because I get stuck on these names. But yeah, I very much enjoyed the Blues Brothers. Same with Indiana Jones, Last Crusade. Yeah, there's certain mysticism to it, but it's in fun. It doesn't take itself seriously. I mean, but I can also enjoy movies where religious mythos is even stronger, like, I don't know, Ben-Hur or Quo Vadis. These where religion plays a big role in the plot and it takes religion seriously. But you have big characters and heroic people and people who believe in principles and who are fighting for principles. The principles might be wrong, but they're fighting for them, and that's good. I wonder what Yaron thinks about Supernatural. Oh, the movie. I've never watched it. I don't know. Yes, John Belushi. I love John Belushi. I think he's hysterically funny. I mean, a movie I love that John Belushi's in, but nobody else likes, is 1941, Steven Spielberg's 1941, about the Japanese invasion of California, or the hysteria about a Japanese invasion of California. I think the movie's hysterical, and very few people like it. Very few people like it. Somebody says it would be fun to watch me dancing. No, it wouldn't be fun. And plus, if you come to the OCON, the Objectives conferences, every summer, you can see me dancing, because usually I'm at the closing banquets and I dance. And it's not fun to watch me dance. All right, so I can enjoy movies that have religious themes if they have interesting characters, interesting stories, interesting plots. And there's A Man for All Seasons. Wow, that's a masterpiece. That's one of my favorite movies. It's a great movie, A Man for All Seasons. And it's about, name just escaped my mind, but it's about a man standing for religious principle and suffering the consequences of it. Henry VIII is the king, and it's anyway. These are don't. I hate The Exorcist. I hate horror movies. I hate all kinds of horror movies. Chariots of Fire, phenomenal movies. Chariots of Fire is a phenomenal movie. But A Man for All Seasons, great movie, highly recommend it. I mean, there is a lot of Thomas More. Thank you. I knew More was in there. It was Thomas More. There's a lot of really great movies. Old ones. Mr. Jones is the only really good movie I think I saw this year. Have you seen the show The Crown? It's an interesting dichotomy. How the royal family forces its queen and husband into being collectivist and not allowing them to show any individuality. So I've watched, I've watched season 1. I watched half of season 2. And I just watched season 4, the last season. And I hated it. I don't like the show at all. I really don't like the show. I hate the queen. I hate the royal family. I hate the queen's husband. I hate them all. I hate everybody. Everybody in the show I think is horrible. I generally hate the monarchy, despise the idea of kings and queens. And now I can understand it in the 18th century, 17th century, 16th century, but in the 21st century, I enjoyed, the only aspect of The Crown that I enjoyed in season 1 was the depiction of Churchill. And the only reason I watched season 4 was because I knew it had a depiction of Margaret Thatcher, and I was curious how that would be, and I thought it was quite good. So I really, really enjoyed. I really, really enjoyed that aspect to it. But whenever I went to Princess Diana, who I don't have any real view, I just don't care about Princess Diana, or about the Queen, or about Charles, who I think is a creep. These are the symbols of collectivism and altruism and sacrifice is constantly demanded. And the Queen is proud of the sacrifice. I can't stand Queen Elizabeth. There's nothing to like about her. She's got dignity, okay, but she has no life. She's stuck in a job she doesn't want. And she does it well by having a stiff upper lip, and the family's dysfunctional. Everything about the family is dysfunctional. So I did not, the acting is brilliant. And stuff, but I don't understand. Not that I'm accusing anybody of who likes the crown of this. But generally, I don't understand the obsession people have about the monarchy. I never understood it. I'm anti-monarchy. I'm with the founding fathers. We don't need a king, and I wish we would get rid of all kings. So. Anyway, that's my little rant on the crown. Why I really don't understand the idea of a king. Post the American Revolution. Okay, now we've got a bunch of questions, a bunch of super chat questions that we'll try to get to over the next few minutes. All right. Okay, can you expand on what happened when you objected to the environmentalism being taught at your kid's school? Well, first, I'd say that the teacher was, this was the kind of headmistress of the school, the owner of the school even, because it was a Montessori school. She was truly perplexed. Nobody had ever objected before. And I said, if you're going to teach this, I want you to teach the opposite. This was about global warming. This is in the 90s, about global warming. If you're going to say that human activity is killing the penguins on, I don't know, someplace, then you've got to present the other side, which says, no, none of that is happening. You can't present propaganda as if it's knowledge. And she was taken aback by it. She didn't know what to make of it. She didn't object, but she didn't know what to do with it. But other parents really want it. And what they did is they stopped dealing with the topic, at least in the way that I objected to it. So I think they were having the kids read this little magazine. I forget the name of it. And they just stopped having the kids read the magazine. The magazine had these constantly leftist environmentalist stories in it. And I just said, you can't let them read this. This is not fair. So they stopped, instead of offering the other side, they just stopped offering it at all. Thank you, Matthew. It is an honor to defend free markets. Let's see. Thoughts on Veronica DeRougy and Tyler Cowen. Veronica DeRougy, I think, works at Mercatus. I think she does good work on I don't follow her a lot, but I think she does good work on regulation, on deregulation, on the role of government. So, the stuff I've read of hers is good. Free market, it's good stuff, solid. Tyler Cowen, I like Tyler. I know him personally. I like him. He's an interesting guy. He's very quirky. I often find myself reading his economic analysis of something and learning something from it, really learning from it. Often I'll learn something. I find the fact that he has a very eclectic perspective, that he covers a lot of different issues, that he goes very wide and broad, and I find interesting. I'm not sure it serves his audience that well. But I also think he is a compromiser. He's given up on real freedom and on real free markets, on real capitalism. He believes in too much government and too much of a role of government. He often addresses the status quo as if it's metaphysically given and cannot be changed. He's not enough of a fighter for change. He's too much of a accepting the status quo. accepting the status quo. But I read him, and I encourage people to read him because he has such an interesting view of the world, of events, of how things happen. He's also always got some kind of a twist, some kind of a different view of it that I find really interesting, and I think you would enjoy. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact goes into effect as soon as the member states control at least 270 electoral college votes. That went into effect then today. Would either a U.S. republic model or British parliamentary be better to support capitalism, or would capitalism work in either? I think you need a Republican. I think a Republican model would be better. British parliamentary gives too much power to the prime minister. It's too centralized. The Constitution is not protecting enough of individual rights. But it's difficult in a parliamentary model. Parliamentary model forces you to form coalitions, explicitly give and take about things. It doesn't fit into a true limited government model where being in government is a sideline. It's a second job. It's not your primary. Parliamentary systems are for lifetime politicians, and there's something about the dynamics of them. Capitalism, I think, is much better success in its pure form. In the mixed economies, UK could be freer than the United States. That could happen. A parliamentary system, because the United States is so unfree. But in a pure capitalist, I think you have to have something like a separation of powers. Really, really hard to pass laws. Lots of places in which the law could be vetoed. Like the president can veto Congress. Congress cannot approve a president legislation. And the Supreme Court could veto either one of them. That is the beauty of the American system. I do think the Americans created as close to the ideal system that I can imagine. In a system, the Constitution is flawed, but even the flaws, they can be fixed. Johan, are you making the absurd proposition that the left and right are both statist? Oh, yeah, I read this already. Yes, I am. And you put a smile after that, so I know you didn't mean the question. Someone asked me, quote, if you're cold and detached, wouldn't you feel more comfortable with Rand's philosophy than an altruistic philosophy? No. There's nothing about Ayn Rand's philosophy that's cold and detached. Do I look like I'm cold and detached? I'm passionate and engaged. So no, I think Rand's philosophy is for people who care and who are engaged and who feel. Because you gotta feel being alive, not just kind of theoretically know that you're alive. Survival needs to be felt completely integrated. Happiness, all of that needs an integrated being. Not a cold and detached is not integrated. You can't be happy cold and detached. And by the way, why would anybody find an altruistic philosophy, not altruism as people understand it, but altruistic philosophy, the idea of sacrificing for others and giving up your life? Why would anybody, detached or not, find that appealing? If you have to choose between high taxes or state borrowing, which do you choose? Forget austerity, will never happen. High taxes. High taxes. Definitely. Much more straightforward, much more visible, much more transparent, and much more likely that people will rebel against. People never rebel against borrowing. I want people to suffer the consequence of their actions and to feel it. We always suffer the consequence of actions. We suffer the consequence of death. But the consequences are hidden from us. With taxes, they're explicit. They're right there in your face. So I want people to suffer in their face. Does MMT stand for a constant increase in the printing of money, or does it scale it down during better economic conditions? It scales it up or down depending on what the central planner believes the capacity in the economy is. So if the central planner believes that there are factories that could be used at greater capacity, if there are people who are employed that could be, or unemployed who could be employed, that if the idea is that if the economy had more money, then more people would be employed and more assets would be utilized. Then you expand the money supply. You shrink it when there's inflation, and you shrink it by raising taxes. So for MMT, taxes are not a means necessarily of penalizing wealth or penalizing the rich or redistributing wealth, because you can redistribute wealth just by printing money. Tax is a means by which you control inflation. For them, reducing taxes is inflationary, increasing taxes is deflationary. Thoughts on Cicero? I don't know enough about Cicero to really have interesting thoughts about him. I mean, anybody from that era is amazing in terms of how intellectual they were, how smart they are, thoughtful they were, how eloquent they were relative to today, particularly people in politics. Cicero was in politics. Why are property taxes legal? I don't know why any tax is legal. People are taxed to fund schools their kids do not attend. Are there any ways to fight this overreach in legal setting? No. I mean, the government has the power to tax. It passed a law that taxes property, and that's it. If you want to fight it, you have to fight it as immoral, as unjust. And you have to fight it, therefore, by reversing the law, by getting rid of the laws. But you're not going to fight it in a legal setting. There's no constitutional protection against property taxes, unfortunately. What are your thoughts on Russia starting a golden visa program? It appears that Russia is starting to pave the way for dual citizenship soon. I mean, it makes sense. They're struggling. They're struggling financially. They're struggling economically. They know something that we forget is that immigrants are a massive pool of potential job creators, innovators, and economic growth. Good for Russia for doing it. It's not enough. They've got other problems that they need to fix, but it's a step in the right direction. Best Christmas movies. How about I delay that and do a show on best Christmas movies? John Belushi and Ayn Rand died within days of each other. I did not know that. They, of course, died from very different causes. I think John Belushi died of drug overdose. Ayn Rand died of old age and respiratory disease. My friend wants me to travel with him to Cuba. Is there anything immoral about spending tourist dollars in a nation with an oppressive government? Would I sanction evil? Yeah, I think in Cuba you would. Cuba is not just an oppressive regime like others. In Cuba, there is literally no private property. When you spend money at a hotel, that money ultimately goes to government. When you spend money at a restaurant, those restaurants are controlled and run, in a sense, by the government. Much of the money you would spend, unless you spend it in the black market, in Cuba is directly under control of the government. That's not the case, for example, in China. Although I would hesitate to go to China today. But in China, the money goes to the person you're giving it to, and maybe they get taxed, but they get taxed in lower than we do in the United States. In Cuba, it literally belongs to the government. So I would not go to Cuba. I would not go to Cuba. I think I would not buy Cuban goods. I don't think there should be a trade embargo. I don't think we should have tariffs on Cuba. But I wouldn't buy Cuban goods because I wouldn't want to support the Cuban government's oppression of its own people. What do you think of the term emotional intelligence? Is there any legitimacy to it, or is it an anti-concept? I mean, I think it's an anti-concept. There's something there, but it's confused by the word intelligence, right? There's something to the fact that some people are better tuned and know how to deal with other people's emotions. And there's a value to that, particularly as a teacher, particularly as a communicator. You want to be able to recognize somebody else's emotions and adapt how you say, what you say to them in order to be the most effective. And certainly in management, this is important. But is it intelligence? I don't think so. And of course, they never define intelligence, really. Coping with the world, I guess. So I don't think it's an issue of intelligence. There is a phenomena there. I don't know what the terminology would be for that phenomena. And it is a phenomena that's important in certain functions in life. All right, last question. I was born in 91. Wow, you're young. And I think in second or third grade, I wrote about DDT and bald eagle eggs. What the F? Why was a third grader writing about DDT? Well, because they were indoctrinating you into the fact that, human beings, human actions are destructive to nature and destructive to things you should care about more than human beings. Do you know how many people die every year? Because we don't use DDT. and therefore they get malaria and die. And even if it caused the bald eagles to go extinct, how many millions of people should die so that the bald eagle should exist? How many millions of people should die so bald eagles should exist? DDT, as far as I can tell, is safe for human beings in the kind of doses that are required to save us from mosquitoes. It is a great tragedy of the last 30, 40, 50 years that we have not used DDT more and protected ourselves. It's why people got Zika. It's why people died from malaria. It's why horrible diseases passed along because through mosquitoes, because we won't use DDT to kill them. Today we could actually use genetic engineering to kill them, and it's travesty that we don't. But why? Because you're being indoctrinated at age 2 or 3 into a particular socially acceptable view of the world. And you're not being taught to think, you're being taught to regurgitate the knowledge they want you to have. All right, guys, I will see you on Wednesday. Have a great rest of your week. I hope it's productive. I hope it's happy. And I will